Hey, it's Matthew Cudmore, and welcome to Story Behind the Stone. Today, we're heading to Franklin, Tennessee, where Army veteran Cyndi Benavides shares how a walk past an overground lot turned into a mission to preserve one of the most historically rich per square inch cemeteries in America. If you've ever wondered how one person can change the way an entire community remembers, this is the episode for you. Cyndi, thank you so much for joining us and for the incredible and inspiring work that you're doing. We are all cheering you on. And to our listeners, thanks for tuning in. Welcome to Story Behind the Stone, a show where we talk service, sacrifice, and story, connecting you with historical and veterans causes organizations around the world that are changing the way the world remembers. Today, I'm so pleased to be joined by Cyndi Benavides of Mallory Cemetery in Franklin, Tennessee. Cyndi, it's wonderful to see you. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
You reached out of the blue in 2023, a couple of years ago, and you just have the most interesting story. Tell me a little bit about how you ended up in Franklin, Tennessee, and got attached to, I guess, what I affectionately call America's smallest but most important, most history per square inch cemetery.
So I moved to Tennessee in the early 90s. And so I've been in the Franklin area for a long time. But it was 2020 and, lots of stores or businesses were closed. And so I had just gotten out to take a walk around. And I noticed this overgrown area. Didn't know what it was, so read the sign and it said it was a cemetery. And I'm like, well, where is the cemetery? Because I don't see it. And the weeds were super tall, so I couldn't see any of the headstones. But I did read the sign. And I am an Army veteran, and so I felt a kindred connection with one of the buried there who is a Revolutionary War patriot. And, I just kind of felt that tap on the shoulder. Hey, you can do something about this. You know how to use a weed eater, you know how to mow the lawn, you can do this. And so I reached out to someone that was named on the sign and went to the local hardware store and bought a battery-operated weed eater and just started whittling away at the weeds. And slowly but surely, the headstones started to appear. And so once that became manageable, I was out there every weekend just trying to get the weeds down. And that kind of led to, now I can see the headstones, but I can't read them because they're all black and different, discoloration.
Yeah.
So I don't know what they say. And so then started my attending preservation workshops to try to figure out how to learn how to clean up these headstones. And that kind of started my love for preservation work. I ask people sometimes to join me, or like I say, well, what are your hobbies? What do you like to do? What gets you excited, to wake up every morning? And when I mention the cemetery, they're like, oh, that gives me the heebie-jeebies. I'm not doing cemetery work. But I do feel like sometimes we seek out opportunities and hobbies, and sometimes those passions find us. And so that was my story, is it found me. I didn't go seeking it, it found me.
You started this nonprofit around the Mallory Cemetery. Tell us a little bit about Franklin, Tennessee, just for context for listeners.
So Franklin is a southern state in America, and it was named after Benjamin Franklin. So Benjamin Franklin was friends with a early settler in the area. And so when Benjamin Franklin would come and visit, his friend, when it was time for his friend to name the city, he chose Franklin. And so that's kind of where Franklin, Tennessee comes from. Franklin is situated about 20 minutes away from Nashville. So a lot of people are familiar with Nashville.
Can you tell us a little bit about Mallory Cemetery itself?
Mallory Cemetery is located in a business commercial district. It used to be all farmland. John Mallory, who used to own over 200 acres in this area, wrote in his will that he wanted this family cemetery to always be protected. So at some point, it got written into his into a deed, which protects that cemetery. And the cemetery is about 100 feet by 100 feet. So there are 9 burial plots within dry stacked stone walls. The cemetery dates back to the 1830s. Through our cleanup efforts, we have identified one unmarked stone that is outside of the dry stacked stone walls. And so we're kind of in the process of doing research to identify whose stone that belongs to.
So John Mallory had hundreds of acres in the area. Give us a little bit of context about his involvement in the community.
He was a farmer, first and foremost, but he was very community oriented. He was involved in helping to build our local Spencer Creek Bridge in the area. So that to me just tells us a little bit about the kind of person that he was. After he moved to the Franklin area and got settled here, his parents moved from Virginia and settled here with him. And so, yes, in his will, he set aside that his family plot would always be protected.
It's a really interesting story. And you said there were 9 stones. And they're all identified? They're all Mallory's?
They are all Mallory's. So it's Roger, who is a American War patriot, and his wife, Lucy. And then it's John and his wife and their kids.
You've kind of been the caretaker for this site for a few years now, and you've established this nonprofit. What are you feeling when you enter those low stone walls?
It's funny that you asked that, because when I walk in, I always say, John, Roger, guide me to whatever it is you want me to do. I say, is this what you want me to be working on? But we recently, through several storms, have had a huge oak tree fall into the tree is in the cemetery, but its huge limbs have fallen and have damaged a lot of headstones and the walls. And when the tree fell, I went and I walked to the cemetery, and I just remember saying to the tree, "You've done your job. You've been sitting here or you've been standing for over almost 200 years, protecting the buried here." So I feel a direct connection with the trees and the buried there. So it just gives me a really good feeling to know that I'm doing something. I know in the 1830s, they probably had no idea that here Cyndi was going to come along and be taking care of this land, right, of this area. But I feel like if they were looking down, they would be very pleased.
What are the challenges that you've experienced? You've got trees falling, you've got storms coming through.
One of the challenges is ownership. And so in Tennessee, if the cemetery is located on a piece of land that is owned by somebody, like the landowner, they don't necessarily bear the responsibility of cleaning it up or maintaining it. They just have to give access rights to descendants or whoever wants to come in and maintain it. But one of the challenges has been, okay, now that we know the cemetery is not on any owner's property, it is owned itself, we're kind of in a little bit of a gray area where the cemetery itself has to figure out how to maintain itself, right? So that was my driving force in trying to establish a nonprofit that would put a strategic plan in place to ensure that the cemetery continues to be maintained for many, many generations.
Do you see any of the next generation kind of visiting, like taking time to check it out?
Yeah, so we have these regular community volunteer work days, and so people come out and help us, raking and weed eating and stuff. We had a recent young visitor recently, and she, her eyes got really wide. She said, "I've never been to a real cemetery before." I remember just talking to her about the history, and these were real people, and there's a lot of history in here. And, these were early founders of this area. And so, one of my things when people come to visit the cemetery is try to remove that stigma that, you can go and visit the cemetery. My goal is to make it a pleasant environment where people don't necessarily see it as, oh, it's a cemetery, and instead have the perspective of, oh, I'm going to visit a piece of history. There's stories here to be told. It's the past, I think, talking to the future.
I think that's so interesting. I mean, as a kid, I had a superstition. and I don't know where this came from. When we would drive past the cemetery, I would hold my breath. Are there any superstitions that you encountered?
I have had even adults say to me they will not go near the cemetery. It's just, they didn't give me specifics, but whatever they have experienced or whatever their knowledge is, they just will not come near the cemetery. I'm a little bit more open minded, I guess. And I'm like, I try to empower people to work within their gifting area. So I'm like, hey, if you don't want to come out to the cemetery, that's great. Maybe you can help share our story on social media. Maybe you can help us do fundraising or help in other ways.
Before we started recording, you had a special visitor pop in over your shoulder, your daughter. What does she say about your involvement with Mallory?
She loves it. She thinks it's very inspiring that I'm out there doing this work and sharing the stories. She told me recently, she said, you get really excited when you start to talk about the cemetery. And I'm like, well, I think then that's what I'm supposed to be doing with my life. I remember I was out at the cemetery one day and there was two young adults walking by and there were two women. And I remember they just kind of gave me a woohoo, hurrah. And I was like, what's going on? And she said, you're inspiring. I'm glad to see you doing this work. It's inspiring to us, And so, yeah, I think my daughter is proud of the work that she sees me doing. And I hope that it encourages her to get out into the community and do something, of her own accord in the future.
You made a comment earlier before we started recording that you never would have thought to find yourself establishing a nonprofit for a cemetery. What does 1991 Cyndi, what would she say about what you're doing today?
My mindset back then, and I do remember thinking this, is whatever you do in life, do it well. I do remember that. And so that inspires me today, whether it's cemetery work or, doing some other kind of work, is whatever I do, I just want to do it well, and I want it to help people. And so I've often considered myself a bit of a connector person. If somebody needs resources, I'm like, I'm on it, and I start researching and all of that. So I feel that the 90s version of me would be very proud of the work that I'm doing.
Cyndi, when you're walking between those low slung walls with someone that's never been to Franklin, never been to Mallory Cemetery, what do you tell them about the significance of the site to the wider area?
I like to tell people that what you see outside of the cemetery walls right now was not always there. It's very commercialized now. But I'd like to tell people that these are early settlers in the area, and I'd like to share with them the things that they had to overcome, you know what I mean, to get to the land that we are standing on today. I walk around and I'm like, well, they used to walk this land, so I will look down and I'll be like, they were here. If they were looking down just like I am right now, So I want people to remember that the Mallory Cemetery is a reminder of all of the people that come before us.
I think it's really inspiring what, the whole Franklin area has done for historical preservation. You must find a lot of like-minded people in your community.
The county has an organization called the Heritage Foundation, whose goal is awareness and preservation. And so they're very active in the community, and they offer preservation workshops. So people, if they are landowners and they have cemeteries on their property, they can take advantage of the tools and the information that they provide to learn about how to take care of the things on their land. So they're great advocates to have in our community.
You have this new nonprofit, and you have these volunteer work days, which is so cool to see being a hub for the community. What else are your needs right now?
We're looking for someone that can help build a website. We're talking about putting together an Adopt a Plot program where the community, or you don't even have to live in Franklin, but anybody with a history passion or a genealogy passion, or maybe they're just great researchers that can help us adopt a plot and help us research the stories, and with the goal of finding descendants for the buried there. And then another part of the goal of the board would be to come up with a strategic plan that will help us to implement fundraising that will provide perpetual care. We don't want the cemetery to fall into disrepair again. So we want to be able to restore it and then preserve it so that many generations can enjoy it.
What are the best ways for listeners to support you and your mission?
Some of the things that they can do if they're local, they can join our community volunteer work days. If they're not in the area, they can support us by supporting our fundraising campaigns. They can also get involved by helping us to build a website. They can help us by sharing our story. Our goal is to find descendants, and so spreading the story far and wide would be extremely helpful to us.
How can people follow you on this journey?
People can follow along our journey on Facebook. We have a very active Facebook page, and it's Mallory Cemetery Franklin TN.
Cyndi, how do you see interpretation evolving and the future of interpretation at Mallory?
One of my visions is to create a park-like setting at the cemetery to encourage people to not be so intimidated by it being a cemetery, and then utilizing modern technologies to help us bring those stories to life. We attract younger generations by offering newer technologies and maybe using holograms and audio tours, just to get people interested in that history again.
We believe that it does offer that kind of bridge from the past to the future and to the next generation as well. So we're cheering you on or wishing you the very best as you evolve the cemetery. You've already got it in such a great place. You're ready for this next chapter with the nonprofit at Mallory Cemetery. Cyndi, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was so great to connect and just chat with you and just share a little bit more about what makes this place so special.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Story Behind the Stone is available on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and on the Wreaths Across America radio network, on iHeartRadio, Audacity, and TuneIn. Just search for Wreath. We air every Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern on the Wreaths Across Radio Network. Thank you for tuning in.